You're watching Study with Sudhir. This is your favorite digital classroom and we are going to be taking a look at Lost Spring, which is a chapter in Flamingo textbook, NCERT textbook, which is prescribed for CBSE Class 12 students as part of their English syllabus. Now, these are essentially two different stories, right, which are combined into a single chapter, and this is written by an author named Jung, who was both a writer as well as a journalist, and you can find many books written by her as well as many articles written in many prominent newspapers and magazines by Jung. Now, these are two different stories, one set in Delhi, one set in Uttar Pradesh. So, we will be doing it in two parts. There is a theme of poverty and lost childhood, right, which is really the common theme running through these two stories. But when you come to kind of answering questions from this particular chapter in the examination, what you would really need to understand is the nuances, the little details, and that's what you will be tested on. I have been seeing lots of videos which basically give you a summary in Hindi. Trust me, that's not the way to understand English. You may get a basic gist, but if you think that if you're just going to listen to the Hindi summary and write good quality answers which will get you full marks in the English examination, sorry to say, you're completely mistaken. You need to understand the language in which you need to write the answers in your examination. So I wanted to make this limited point in your own interest, entirely in your own interest. Please try to understand these chapters, these stories, these poems in simple English, and that's what we strive to do here on Study with Sudhir. Explain in simple English instead of trying to explain it in a vernacular language that will not be in your interest. You may be able to understand the story, but when it comes to writing good quality answers, you might find yourself losing marks. Okay, grammatical mistakes tend to happen when you think in Hindi or in any other regional language and then try to translate into English, and I'm sure all of you understand that. Now, I've told you about Jung. She's a prominent writer and has written lots of stories, especially concerning children. So we'll start with the first story in part 1, which pertains to the story of a specific boy in Delhi, right? Sometimes I find a rupee in the garbage. Now, this is a line which usually comes as a question, and then you are asked questions pertaining to this particular line, and it's a very meaningful line. Why do you do this? That's how the story begins. I asked Sahib, whom I encounter every morning, scrounging for gold in the garbage dumps of my neighborhood. Encounter means, that is, I end up meeting him, I end up running into him. And when I use this different kind of words which are almost like synonyms, please make a note, because especially when you are writing your answers, it's always better not to repeat a particular word. You understand? Because that will show that your vocabulary is essentially limited. So if you use different synonyms like the kind I use in my video explanations, it will only help you. Scrounging essentially means looking for essentially, like especially when there are mountains of garbage, you with a little stick or something or with the hands, you essentially are looking for something. And scrounging has a slight sense of, even the way it is pronounced has a sense of roughness to it. Scrounging, right? So scrounging for gold in the garbage dumps. Now, why is he talking about gold? Are we talking about some kind of jewelry which is there in the garbage dumps? No. Please understand, and this is a social context you need to understand, the economic context. The garbage industry, you may be aware, I'm not sure, is a major industry in a sense. When people sell garbage, people who are in charge of this garbage dump, they kind of sift the garbage, what is useful, what may not be very useful, then they sell it, and eventually the garbage industry, which is on the outskirts of any town or city, is actually a big industry. In fact, many contractors actually control different garbage dumps in different towns and cities in the country, right? So, which is why when you sell the garbage, you make money, which is why the reference to gold. So, garbage in that sense is a very lucrative industry in India. Sahib left his home long ago, set amidst the green fields of Dhaka. His home is not even a distant memory. So, the family has migrated from Bangladesh, Dhaka, to Delhi. There were many storms that swept away their fields and homes, his mother tells him. That's why they left looking for gold in the big city where he now lives. Sometimes, of course, they may find some valuables, right, which is highly unlikely. But essentially, if you are able to find something of little value, you sell it, you make some money, for them that becomes gold. I have nothing else to do, he mutters, looking away. So this is like the first sentence, and I would want you to make a note of it because this will be in contrast to the first sentence spoken by the protagonist, the main person in the second story, right? And I will tell you what the difference is in the attitude of the two people. Go to school, I say glibly, realizing immediately how hollow the advice must sound. Now, glibly means saying it off, but being very insincere about it, oh, I think, oh, generally like that, I think you must kind of, exercise regularly. Now, I may not really mean it, I may not even mean to kind of help you with the exercise, but I'm just saying it because it's a very shallow and a very insincere kind of advice that I'm giving. Glibly means that. So when he says that I have nothing to do, she says go to school. She's almost giving him like, a doctor saying, paracetamol kha lo, crocin kha lo, fever kam ho jayega. It's that kind of a thing. So she's very matter of fact saying, go to school, as though, it's very easy for anyone to go to school, because of the socio-economic circumstances that this particular boy comes from. And she realizes immediately that that advice must have sounded very insincere, very hollow. There is no school in my neighborhood. When they build one, I will go. So now you are being given an idea about the kind of atmosphere, the ecosystem that they live in. That there is no school, there is no place where they can actually seek to be educated, seek to be literate, these boys in that part of Delhi. Now, as it is, the situation in Bangladesh where they came from was not good. The situation where they live in Delhi, on the outskirts of Delhi, is not really much better either, right? And it's almost like child labor that these children are indulging in. If I start a school, will you come? I said half jokingly. Now, the author is almost trying to be, I wouldn't say patronizing, but almost trying to be flippant about it, non-serious about it. If I start a school, will you come? It's again like, I say, if I start a gym, will you come and exercise there? I may not have any intentions of starting a gym, right? But I'm just saying it almost as a matter of conversation and in a sense being very non-serious about it. Yes, he says, smiling broadly. A few days later, I see him running up to me. Is your school ready? This line, it may sound on the face of it a very innocent kind of a question by the boy to the author. But the fact that he believes that a school can be made ready within a matter of a few days, it shows also the lack of information, knowledge and understanding of the boy, because for them their whole world is only these garbage dumps. They have never seen anything outside, so their understanding of how the world operates itself, that a school will take this many days and months and years to actually establish, is completely lost on him. He doesn't understand that, right? Which is why this line is very important, because it tells you a particular aspect of that boy's personality. It takes longer to build a school. I say, embarrassed at having made a promise that was not meant. But promises like mine abound in every corner of his bleak world. Bleak as in something which is hopeless, which has no hope. Bleak is, something kuch ka kuch ho nahi sakta hai kind of a thing. And she says, even as she says that it takes longer to build a school, she is actually embarrassed at actually having made that promise, which she knew cannot actually be kept. If I build a school, will you come there? After months of knowing him, I ask him his name. So it takes time. After months of knowing him, normally when we meet somebody the first time, one of the first questions we normally ask is, what's your name? But in this case, for her, for the author, the person, the narrator, the boy was just another face in that whole crowd. She did not even bother to ask him his name. So it shows a sense of, while she's doing other kind of small talk as in non-serious kind of talk, she still hasn't asked him his identity. A name is the identity, and it takes her some months of knowing him before she can actually venture to ask him his name. Sahib Alam. He announces, and announces is an important verb that she has used. She doesn't say he says. Announces because Sahib Alam has a sense of, grandeur, has a sense of royalty about it, which is why she has used the word he announces. He does not know what it means, even though he does not know what it means, but the sound of it, Sahib-e-Alam, has a sense of, being announced, jahan pan aap padhar rahe hain, Badshah, Shehenshah. These are words which have a sense of grandeur about them. Similarly, Sahib-e-Alam. If he knew its meaning, Lord of the Universe, he would have a hard time in believing it. So, the meaning of the word Sahib-e-Alam, and this is normally a question which comes, it means Lord of the Universe. The contrast, the irony of having a name like Sahib-e-Alam and his actual situation is a question which can definitely come as a 2-mark, 3-mark kind of a question. So, please do make a note of it. Unaware of what his name represents, he roams the streets with his friends, an army of barefoot boys who appear like the morning birds and disappear at noon. Over the months, I have come to recognize each of them. So she says, and he's along with a band of boys out there who kind of roam the streets together, and they start early in the morning in order to sift the garbage, and they finish their work by the time it's noon. And she says, over many months, I've begun to recognize each one of them. Who is who? Why aren't you wearing chappals? I ask one. Now, this is another aspect that has been kind of highlighted, that each one of them is actually barefoot. Or at least this boy definitely is barefoot. My mother did not bring them down from the shelf. So he says that his slippers, his chappals are actually kept on a shelf. Even if she did, he will throw them off. Adds another who is wearing shoes that do not match. So shoes of different colors, maybe different sizes also. When I comment on it, he shuffles his feet. Shuffles means he moves his feet almost as though he's embarrassed about the fact that she has discovered that there are different types, and tries to hide them and says nothing. I want shoes, says a third boy who has never owned a pair in his life. He's never had shoes. Traveling across the country, I have seen children walking barefoot in cities, on village roads. It's not lack of money, but a tradition to stay barefoot is one explanation. So she's kind of telling us what she has heard from people, that people say that it's almost like tradition. It's customary to actually stay barefoot, to walk around barefoot. I wonder if this is only an excuse to explain away a perpetual state of poverty. Perpetual means a permanent, a perennial state of poverty, that hamesha hi garibi mein reh rahe hain. As if you do not want to talk about the fact that they are poor and therefore they cannot afford to buy a pair of slippers or a pair of footwear, but they say that it is a tradition and try to explain it in that sense. एक तरह का excuse बनाने की कोशिश करते हैं. Then she tells a story about a man from Udupi. Udupi is a town, a temple town. There's a very famous Lord Krishna temple in Udupi. It's on the coast of Karnataka, right? Mangalore, Udupi, these are like towns which are very close to each other. I remember a story a man from Udupi once told me. As a young boy, he would go to school past an old temple where his father was a priest. He would stop briefly at the temple and pray for a pair of shoes. So you see the kind of need of people. Normally we do not kind of focus so much on shoes or any kind of footwear, but the fact that someone actually prays at a temple asking for a pair of shoes shows how important a pair of shoes are to human dignity itself in general. 30 years later, I visited his town and the temple, which was now drowned in an air of desolation. In the backyard where lived the new priest, there were red and white plastic chairs. Red and white plastic chairs also kind of indicator of a slightly middle class kind of a ecosystem. A young boy dressed in a grey uniform wearing socks and shoes arrived panting and threw his school bag on a folding bed. Folding bed, yet another indication. Looking at the boy, I remembered the prayer another boy had made to the goddess when he had finally got a pair of shoes. Let me never lose them. Again an indication of how important these kind of small, which many of us probably take it for granted. But for many of these boys, a pair of shoes is a symbol of self-respect. It's also a symbol of dignity. It's in many senses also a symbol of having arrived in some way, that mere paas bhi shoe hai, mere paas bhi chappal hai, right? The goddess had granted his prayer. It almost seems like, the goddess was the one who granted his prayer to actually have a pair of shoes. Young boys like the son of the priest now wore shoes, but many others like the rag pickers in my neighborhood remained shoeless. So she's talking about another instance where because of his prayers, because the goddess was kind, and over a period of time, the young son of the priest now was wearing a pair of shoes. But the rag pickers in her neighborhood remained shoeless. So in that sense, the lack of shoes, and this is again important for you to understand and note down, make notes, prepare your answers, is an indicator of what their place in society was. That they had not arrived, the fact that they did not have shoes, the fact that the third boy says, I want shoes, or the second boy is actually wearing shoes that do not match. So in that sense, these different examples that Anish Jung has given in a matter of 2 paragraphs give you a sense of the importance of shoes or footwear in the lives of young boys, because without them they feel very deprived. Okay. My acquaintance with the barefoot rag pickers leads me to Simapuri, a place on the periphery of Delhi yet miles away from it metaphorically. Important line. Now the area where they actually work in is Simapuri. In fact, if you just Google Simapuri and just look at the images, you will find lots of images of the garbage dumps, the rag pickers there, because that's where most of them live. And in a sense, it is like the garbage capital in India's capital, right? And over the years, nothing much has been done for the people who live there in terms of different kind of sanitation facilities, education facilities, the general life in general, how safe it is to be in that kind of an area. So even though it is on the periphery of Delhi, that is, it's almost like on the outskirts of Delhi, but in terms of, in metaphorically speaking, means that actually in terms of the lifestyle out there in Simapuri, and you compare it with, say, the heart of Delhi, Chanakyapuri, Vasant Vihar, Vasant Kunj, Saket, Malviya Nagar, it would be very different from the rest of Delhi, the other parts of Delhi. Those who live here are squatters who came from Bangladesh back in 1971. 1971 is when Bangladesh was formed, when it fought for its independence and East Pakistan became Bangladesh. And these people came from Bangladesh at that time. Sahib's family is among them. Simapuri was then a wilderness. Wilderness means pura ek tarah se jungli ilaka tha. It still is, but it's still no longer empty. In structures of mud with roofs of tin and tarpaulin. So you can imagine it's basically a slum kind of an area. Devoid of sewage, drainage or running water. You know, these are essential things, but Simapuri does not have access to all these things. In structures of mud with roofs of tin and tarpaulin, devoid of sewage, drainage or running water, live 10,000 rag pickers. Please remember this figure because you can use it in your answers. This is giving you an idea about the kind of life out there in Simapuri. They have lived here for more than 30 years without an identity, without permits, but with ration cards that get their names on voters list and enable them to buy grain. So they may not have any kind of work permits. They may be illegal migrants out there in Simapuri having come from Bangladesh, right? They are not Indian citizens in that sense of the word, but they all have ration cards which they can use to buy grain, rice, wheat, pulses, whatever. And they can also, as a result of the ration card, become voters in India, but they are not technically Indian citizens in the real sense of the word. Food is more important for survival than an identity. Again, a very deep sentence that khana zaruri hai. The food is important, which is why the ration card is more important than an Aadhaar card. Of course, at that time there was no Aadhaar card, but I'm talking about post 1971. But a ration card is much more important because they can at least get the food grain in order to be able to manage their kitchen and home and keep them going. If at the end of the day we can feed our families and go to bed without an aching stomach, we would rather live here than in the fields that gave us no grain. Very important that even though they lived in Bangladesh, even though they were farmers there, etc., their fields did not really provide them with any kind of food. But here, even though the life in general is not great in Simapuri, because all the time they are living amidst garbage, at least they are having access to a ration card, as a result of which they are able to get food grain for themselves. Say a group of women in tattered saris. Tattered saris means saris which are kind of torn, right? When I asked them why they left their beautiful land of green fields and rivers, Wherever they find food, they pitch their tents that become transit homes. So they become almost like nomads, moving from one place to another. Transit is that, in transit means in movement from one place, from place A to place B. Children grow up in them, becoming partners in survival. So they grow up there, they take birth there, they're born there, they survive there, and they grow up there. And survival in Simapuri means rag picking. That's the only occupation that they can ever get into. Simapuri, the identity becomes that of rag picking. There are many towns in India which essentially become like that. They become known by only one trade. For instance, if you go to Shivakasi, in southern part of Tamil Nadu, the only thing Shivakasi is really known for is production of firecrackers and also production of matchboxes and calendars, right? These are the only three cottage industry that operate out of Shivakasi. So similarly, every little town, etc., is known for one particular industry, and that becomes the identity of that place. For instance, Firozabad, about which we will read in part 2 of this lesson, Lost Spring, is known for its bangle making, right? So every small town especially becomes known like that. Simapuri is known for its rag pickers. Through the years, it has acquired the proportions of a fine art. That is, you also need to know how to kind of pick up the valuables from that garbage. Garbage to them is gold. It's their daily bread, a roof over their heads, even if it is a leaking roof. But for a child, it is even more. So, as I said, garbage to them is gold, because that's what is actually feeding them on a daily basis. It helps them get the money to build a roof over their head, and roof essentially means a tarpaulin sheet, and tarpaulin sheet will obviously always leak during the monsoon. I sometimes find a rupee, even a 10 rupee note. So for him, gold has a slightly different connotation for the children. And Sahib says, sometimes I find even a 10 rupee note. For him, it's a big value. His eyes lighting up. When you can find a silver coin in a heap of garbage, you don't stop scrounging, for there is hope of finding more. So if you find one silver coin, you think that there could actually be more, and you keep looking for that. It seems that for children, garbage has a meaning different from what it means to their parents. For the children, it's wrapped in wonder. For the elders, it's a means of survival. For the elders, if you sell garbage, if you sell the valuables among garbage in some kabad khana, you may actually make some money. For the children, it is these kind of things, finding a silver coin, sometimes finding a 10 rupee note, that makes it worth their time to actually scrounge in the garbage. One winter morning, I see Sahib standing by the fenced gate of the neighborhood club, watching two young men dressed in white playing tennis. I like the game, he hums, content to watch it standing behind the fence. Hums is a very different kind of a word that has been used again. Earlier the word was announces. Now, I like the game. There's almost a musical quality in the way he says. Humming is hums, humming. You know, jab aap gana gaate hain, then you use the word hum, right? When you sing a song. Similarly, I like the game. So the way he says it also has a slightly lilt to it. I go inside when no one is around, he admits. The gatekeeper lets me use the swing. So there is a particular kind of an affinity. There is a kind of a fondness that he has for that game and that place for two reasons. One, he likes the game. From one end to the other, keep hitting the ball in some kind of rhythmic motion. And the fact that the gatekeeper lets him inside to use the swing. So it also shows, please mark this point, that the child in Sahib is still very much alive. The fact that he wants to use the swing, swing is essentially the jhula, that he likes to use the swing shows that the innocence, the child in him is very much alive, and that we are talking about a very, very young boy. Sahib too is wearing tennis shoes that look strange over his discolored shirt and shorts. So now he's wearing tennis shoes. He's wearing tennis shoes. So there has been a movement from being barefoot to wearing tennis shoes. But in contrast to his shirt and shorts, which are very discolored, faded color, discolored as in purane kapde ho gaye hain, they have been put out in the sun. So in that sense, the red color has become faded and has become almost light pink. Someone gave him to, I just use that as an example. Someone gave them to me, he says in the matter of an explanation, the fact that they are discarded shoes of some rich boy who perhaps refused to wear them because of the hole in one of them. Sole mein kabhi kabhi hole ho jata hai, so people discard those shoes. That kind of a shoe is now being worn by Sahib, right? Refused to wear them because of the hole in one of them does not bother him. For one who has walked barefoot Even shoes with a hole is a dream come true. So in that sense, it's a graduation. It's an improvement over his earlier condition of walking barefoot. But the game he's watching so intently is out of his reach. Why? Because tennis obviously is an expensive game. Point number two, he does not have the money to buy what it needs to play a game of tennis, which means a racket, balls, the right kind of shirt, the clothing, the good quality shoes and socks. He doesn't have access to buy all those things. So that's why it is out of reach. He can only be a spectator. He can only be a spectator who can watch all that. This morning, Sahib is on his way to the milk booth. In his hand is a steel canister. I now work in a tea stall down the road, he says, pointing in the distance. So you see, there is a movement in Sahib's story which Anees Jung has so beautifully crafted. From a time when she does not even know his name, to knowing him, then his barefoot days, to him having a pair of shoes, and now him actually working at a tea stall. Okay, so there are 5 different steps that she has spoken about in this story. I am paid 800 rupees and all my meals. So that's his salary. 800 rupees per month, and all his food 3 times a day is also taken care of by the tea stall owner. Does he like his job? Like the job, I ask. His face, I see, has lost the carefree look. So there is a sense of responsibility and maturity that has come in the body language and facial expression of Sahib, which Anees Jung notices. The steel canister seems heavier than the plastic bag he would carry so lightly over his shoulder. So earlier he would carry just a plastic bag in order to put all his stuff, but now he's carrying a steel canister, which is obviously much more heavy. The bag was his, the canister belongs to the man who owns the tea shop. Sahib is no longer his own master, right? The last line is very important, that the steel canister does not belong to him. So there is no sense of ownership over the stuff that he's actually now carrying. And last line, when he says Sahib, now Sahib usually refer to someone who is your master, sir, Sahib, you know, in the Hindi kind of language. And that's why she has used the word, he's no longer his own master. He's now at the mercy of the owner of the tea stall, that he has to do what he says because he's getting 3 times meals and 800 rupees a month. So he is no longer his own master. He's no longer the lord of the universe. So a very beautiful story, narrated in a very interesting manner and kind of showing the passage of time as far as Sahib's life is concerned, or at least during the time that the author has known Sahib. So we will pause here. In part 2, we will know the story of Mukesh, who works in Firozabad, and the entire bangles industry in Firozabad in Uttar Pradesh. Thank you very much for watching.